Hey guys, welcome back to Raid 101 and to our series on buffs and debuffs. Today we're tackling the most complex buffs and debuffs in the game. There aren't many, but they can be a handful to talk about. So let's go. This is an interesting one. Counterattack allows your champions to strike back when they're attacked, even outside their turn. This attack is always a default skill, and it deals 75% of the skill's normal damage. That might seem like not a big deal, but they'll counterattack every time they're hit as long as they have the buff up. Though, if they're attacked by a multi-hit skill, they'll only counterattack once. But if they counterattack with an AoE default skill, you can potentially nuke down an entire enemy team. So, okay, that might sound pretty simple. How did this get into the complex stuff video? Well, let's talk about all the stuff counterattack doesn't do. First, you can't counterattack an enemy counterattack. Second, when you counterattack, you can activate masteries like Giant Slayer or War Master. Third, you can't counterattack while you have a CC effect on you. Mentioned in a previous video, stuff like stun, freeze, or fear can stop a champion from counterattacking, except provoke, that is. Fourth, you can't counterattack retaliatory damage, like damage from reflect damage buffs. You also can't counterattack from damage that comes through a protect ally buff. And finally, if you have a default skill that can give you an extra turn, like if you kill an enemy with it, you can't get the extra turn from a counterattack, even if you fulfill the conditions. Unless, you actually can. There are a couple of legendary champions that can steal turns like that. Okay, this next one is simpler, I promise. Now we're talking veils. Two kinds of veil, plain old veil and the souped up perfect veil. Both versions temporarily hide the champion from the enemy team, making it impossible to target them directly with attack skills. AoE and random hit skills can still land a hit, but Veil has an inbuilt damage reduction against AoE damage, 7.5% for Veil and 15% for Perfect Veil. A normal Veil will be immediately removed if the Veil champion uses a skill that deals direct damage to the enemy. Skills that buff allies or debuff enemies without attacking are fair game and won't remove the Veil. Meanwhile, Perfect Veil stays up no matter what you do. Keep in mind, if all champions on the team have Veil, the enemy will be able to target them normally. Same is true if only one champion remains on the team and they have Veil. It won't prevent the enemy from attacking. Now, for one of the most powerful defensive buffs in all of Raid, Stone Skin. This beast of a buff makes you practically invincible as long as it's active, and the enemy doesn't have any bombs. Firstly, all damage you take is reduced to 15%. That's an 85% damage reduction. Second, it gives the champion an extra health pool equal to 50% of their max HP. Kind of like a shield, though it doesn't replace shield buffs, so you can have both. Stone Skin takes damage before shields. Third, Stone Skin also blocks all debuffs, just like the block debuffs buff. And now you're probably thinking that sounds ridiculous. You're right. Stone Skin is a powerhouse buff, rendering you completely immune to just about everything. Except not quite everything. Bombs bypass basically all of that and are actually more devastating than before. First, bombs aren't blocked by Stone Skin. Second, instead of dealing 85% less damage, bombs deal 300% more damage for a total of 400% damage. Beyond that, the duration of Stone Skin can't be increased, not by anyone, though it can be decreased. Next up, we have a strange contestant, Hex. This debuff causes the champion to take sympathetic damage whenever their allies get hit. When the ally of a Hex champion is hit by a single target attack, the Hex champion also takes 10% of that damage. That damage is duplicated, not transferred. The original target still takes full damage. When the ally of a Hex champion is hit by an AoE attack, the Hex champion also takes 2% of that damage. Not 10%. But I mean, if it's an AoE attack, that means 2% of each ally champion, plus the Hex champion also probably got hit by the AoE. Now for the caveats. Damage dealt through the Hex ignores defense. That's nice. Hex is only transfer damage dealt by hits though, so it ignores stuff like bombs, HP burn, poison, reflect damage, and so on. Damage taken from retaliation attacks does get duplicated by Hexes though, so watch out. Most champions that can place Hex debuffs can exploit them in some way. Maybe they spread debuffs to Hexed enemies, or they attack them more times, or they steal buffs from them. Some of them apply additional debuffs, or deal more damage, or ignore defense. A fair number of those champions have passives that increase the damage Hexed enemies take, or reduce their resistance, or some other nasty penalty. So really, Hex only seems weak. It can do just about everything in the right hands. And last of the crazy complicated debuffs, we have petrification. This nasty crowd control debuff works kind of like freeze, but even nastier. Firstly, yes, like any other CC debuff, petrification makes the champion skip their turn. They also can't counterattack, just like stun and freeze. Second, much like freeze, petrification reduces the damage the target champion takes, this time by 60% instead of 25%. So, it actually makes them tougher than freeze does, which sounds bad. But then thirdly, petrification strips all buffs off the champion and blocks all new buffs. Doesn't stop debuffs though, yikes. And to make matters worse, bombs ignore the 60% damage reduction and deal an extra 300% damage on top of that for a total of 400% damage. Considering that bombs already ignore defense, this could instantly take down most champions. Alright, that wraps it up for buffs and debuffs. If you thought this video was useful, be sure to hit like and subscribe. We've still got a little bit further to go in this series, and you won't want to miss the next episode.